been talking about fear, and this is our third session, and today I'm going to talk about overcoming fear. And so I like to be really practical when it comes to overcoming fear. And so one of the things that I found that's a practical way to overcome fear is to use a prescription from the Word, okay? And for years, this was my prescription for fear, which is Philippians 4:6-7, okay? And I'll read the verses to you. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And I really like that because I realized that using that as a prescription, the first part of the prayer is do not be anxious about anything, about the verse, right? So the first thing is recognizing when I'm anxious, okay? So I recognize that I'm anxious. And then in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving. So first I'm going to present to the Lord what my anxiety is, or what is the thing that I'm worried about, or what is the thing that I'm fearful about. And I'm going to present it with thanksgiving. And that's because I believe Romans 8:28, that God works all things together for good. So I'm thanking him that he can do that, okay? And so I start to thank him that even though I'm in the midst of being afraid of something, or I'm anxious about something, or I'm worried about something, that he can take care of this situation, okay? And then I present my request to him. So my request is, okay, God, I'm anxious about this. And this is, this is what I need, or these are the things that are coming against me. So, I think, I don't know if I mentioned before, but I used to have these anxiety attacks when I was a single mom, and every Saturday I would have, all the things that I had to do. So what I would do is I'd make a list of all the things that I had to do, and I would present it to the Lord, and I would just say, okay, Lord, I thank you that you're God over this, that you are Lord over this, that you are in charge of me and of every circumstance in my life. And then I would ask him, like, what do I have to take off this list? Because I realized I couldn't do everything. And when I would do that, then I would just let go of some things, put it in God's hands, and just allow myself to rest and to relax so that this anxiety and the panic attack could pass. And if this was really, for me, a way of keeping the enemy from having his way over me, it's just, I just use it as a prescription. You thank God, you present your requests, and you let God give you his peace. And it was, kind of like, take 2 aspirins and call me in the morning kind of thing. So, that is one way that you can, a really good practical way of, dealing with fear or dealing with anxiety. So again, when I mentioned, the first thing is learning to recognize when there's fear in your heart. That's a really, really important part of any healing process, okay? If you've done Elijah House, you'll know that Elijah House talks about recognition is the first step to healing in any area of your life. And so we want to first recognize when there is fear in our hearts. Okay, so asking you want to know, what does it feel like when I have fear in my body? And remember that fear is the expectation of evil. So you want to find out, what are your negative expectations? Okay, what is the evil, bad thing that you are picturing is going to happen? So at that point, you really have to ask God, what is really in my heart? And what are those firm beliefs that we have that are really not in line with what the Word says? Are we believing in our hearts, for instance, that we are alone? Are we believing in our hearts that we're worthless, or that we don't have any value? The second thing you want to do is, after you've identified and recognized what this fear is, ask yourself, what inner vows have I made? And remember that inner vows are those decisions that we make to protect ourselves from the things that we fear are going to happen. Okay, so we have to ask God to show us the ways in which we've tried to protect ourselves from that evil that we are expecting. Have we made a decision not to need anyone because we believe we're going to be abandoned? Or have we decided not to let anyone know how much we care, that we think, because we think so little of our worth? So we're like, I don't think very much of myself. I don't value myself very highly, but I'm not going to let anybody know that I care what you think about me. So that's the first thing. You want to first recognize when you have this fear, recognize what the fear is and how you're trying to deal with the fear. Then the other thing is to give those fears to the Lord. The psalmist says in Psalm 34:4, I sought the Lord and he heard me and he delivered me from all my fears. And so we can give our fears to the Lord and trust him to deliver us from fear. Okay. So another thing you want to do is you want to ask God, what is his truth about your fear? Okay. So if you are fearing this negative thing, if you have this expectation of evil, you can see what you're picturing in your heart. You want to ask the Lord, what is your truth about this negative expectation and belief? Okay. If you have a memory that's bothering you, that is causing you to have this fear, invite Jesus into the memory, and ask him to heal that memory and to bring his perspective to the memory. Or if you have a fearful picture, so you're picturing a bad future, then you want to ask him to come into that picture and bring you his truth. Okay. We want to always confess and repent our negative belief and then renounce the inner vow that we've used to try to protect ourselves. And then I just played a song called Nothing to Fear by Audrey Assad. I love that song because it talks about Jesus, God is with us, and that's why we don't have to fear. And the beautiful verse that says, what can separate me from your perfect love? What can separate me from your perfect love? Nothing can separate me from God's perfect love. So we need to realize that God is always with us. And I think about the fact that Joshua and Caleb were the only two spies who did not die by the plague. Okay. Later, by the plague, they didn't die in the wilderness. In other words, later, Joshua is told repeatedly in Joshua chapter 1 and verses and on, he's told repeatedly not to fear. And every time God is telling him not to fear, the basis for him not to be afraid is that the Lord will be with him wherever he went. And that is because it's the Lord's presence that banishes our fear. In the past couple of years, I've been having some, internal battles and fighting some fears of my own. And it's been so interesting that every time I've come to the Lord with, the thoughts that I'm having about myself, about the people around me, or about the circumstances that I'm in, I just find that the first thing the Lord says to me is, I am with you. And for a long time, I kept feeling like, why is he saying that to me? Like, I want solutions. I want you to tell me what to do or how to do it right, or, what's wrong with me. But instead, he was just telling me, I'm with you. And that's because his presence is what banishes fear. Okay. And so we want to learn how to meditate on the scriptures that remind us of his constant presence. And he is constantly saying, at least to me, and I know he says it to each one of his children, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And, Moses in the wilderness, one of my favorite passages in the Bible is when Moses says, if you don't come with me, I don't want to go. And so God's presence is what really protects our hearts. And remember that when he says he will never leave you nor forsake you, forsake means to abandon someone or something. And there's some synonyms for that, meaning to renounce, to abandon, to relinquish, to dispense with, to disclaim, to disown, to disavow, discard, to wash one's hands of. God never washes his hands of us. I mean, is that incredible? I mean, God doesn't ever give up on us. Can you imagine that? Like, I have given up on myself so many times. And every time I go back to the Lord and I'm like, God, I don't even know how you could stand me. And God is like, I'm not giving up on you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I am with you. And so believing in any way that God might forsake us is the opposite of what the word says about God. Deuteronomy 31:8. I'm just going to go through a few verses. It says, the Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Psalm 37:28 says, for the Lord loves the just and will not forsake his faithful ones. They will be protected forever. Isaiah 41:17 says, the poor and needy search for water, but there is none. Their tongues are parched with thirst. But I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. Isaiah 42:16. I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths I will guide them. I will turn the darkness into light before them and make the rough places smooth. These are the things I will do. I will not forsake them. Deuteronomy 31:6 says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Joshua 1:5, no one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I mean, how many times can God say the same thing to us before we finally get this message sunk into our hearts? All right. So I wanted to give you a little testimony about me. I had to conquer a fear of being underwater. And I think I mentioned in the last video that my mom kind of caused me to be afraid of being in deep water, of swimming. And so the thought of being underwater was just too much for me. I had gotten a wave had come over me when I was a kid at the beach in New York. Rockaway Beach, if anybody knows, Rockaway Beach has some really high waves. And I thought I was drowning, and I didn't drown, but obviously, but it was really a terrifying experience. So I was always afraid of having my head underwater. And so when in 1988, we rented a house that had a pool in the backyard. And this pool, the deep end was 9 feet. So that was a pretty deep, the deep end was pretty deep. And so I was always in the shallow end. I never was going to go into the deep end. But my children knew how to swim because I had made sure, as I mentioned, that they would learn how to swim. And so they were always cannonballing and having a good time, and they come with their friends and they'd be in the water, and I loved being in the water, but I was afraid of being underwater. And so I finally decided that this was too much and I wanted to do something about it. So I told my sons, but at that time they were, I want to say they were like 10 and 11 years old, maybe 12 and 13, I'm not sure. But they were adolescents. And so I said to them, I'll pay each of you $10 if you could teach me how to get into the deep water and how to cannonball. And so they were like, that's easy. Okay. So the first thing I did, so what they did was they they had me put my arms up on the side, and I get in the deep end of the pool and be holding on. And then they had me put my arms up and let myself slide down. And as I was sliding down, I could hear them saying, Mom, you're buoyant. Mom, you're buoyant. Mom, you're buoyant. And so I kept saying, I'm buoyant. I'm buoyant. And so they said, watch what happens when you just go down. And I would go down and just pop up. And so I was like, oh, I am buoyant. And so we did that for a while. And then after a while, I just started to feel more relaxed and not afraid in the water. And then at some point they said, okay, now you can, just get under the water. So once I was no longer afraid of having my head under the water and realizing that I could breathe and not, drown. So I surprised my husband by cannonballing in the pool one day. And of course I didn't do it again while we owned that pool, but I no longer had that fear after that of being underwater. I never became really a great swimmer. I can do the doggy paddle and stuff. But if my head is underwater now, I don't get afraid. And so the steps that I took actually were really interesting, because the first thing I did was I faced my fear. I said, okay, I have this fear of being underwater and I need to face it. And the second thing is, I got, help. I got help from my children, but the help that they gave me was what they were saying to me, that I was buoyant. I believed them, and I believed that I was buoyant. And as I believed that I was buoyant, I just, was able to start to relax and not have that fear reaction every time the water came over me. And the third thing that was really most important was I knew that I wasn't alone. And I knew that at a moment's notice that they would jump into the water and come to my rescue if anything happened. So they never left me alone. Okay. And so I really believe that that's just like a little microcosm of one of the ways that you can deal with fear. Is that the most important thing is realizing we are not alone, okay? And we too can be set free from fear and anxiety. So another practical step in getting set free from fear is to discipline your thought life. Really, you want to be careful what you expose your senses to. And I think it's Grant Mullen who talks about what if moments. So if you get a what if thought, okay, what if is you start to think about all the bad things that could happen, in these circumstances. And 2 Corinthians 10:5 says that we are to cast down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bring every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. I want you to think of entertaining fear like driving on a two-way highway, and you're keeping your eye on the oncoming traffic instead of keeping your eye on the road ahead of you. If you keep your eye on the oncoming traffic, you're going to veer in that direction, and then you may have a head-on collision. All right. Remember, that's one of the things that they tell you when you're learning how to drive is to keep your eye on the road that you want to be on. If you're looking straight ahead, you're going to drive in that direction. Wherever your eyes are turned to, either way, if they're not turned forward, that's the direction that you're going to go in. Okay. So last week, I shared with you a little bit about love bonds versus fear bonds in relationships. And again, you can go to that link that I've given you on fear for our recommended resources, and you could read this whole thing. But just the fear bonds, changing the fear bonds into love bonds, there's a few steps that you can take. And there's just 4 steps that Jim Wilder gives of how to change your fear bonds into love bonds. The first thing is to know and enjoy who you are. Realize that a love bonded relationship requires 2 individuals who know their true selves. Therefore, it's vital to know and enjoy the important aspects of who you are before you can fully bond with others. So find out who you are and start to accept who you are and enjoy who you are. God enjoys us the way we are. Arthur Burke has this teaching he talks about God enjoying our joy. And I've been talking with some of my students over the last few days about the desires of our hearts. And that when God sees us enjoying the things that he's put in our hearts that make us happy, he enjoys our joy. It's just like if you are watching a little child that you love having a good time, and you're not the one that's having the good time, but you can enjoy their joy and just enter into it with them. And so learn how to enjoy who you are and to enter into your own joy. Okay. Number 2, take responsibility for your own actions and feelings. In fear bonds, people often believe they have to guess what the other person is thinking or feeling, and then anticipate how not to upset them. And, that is not true. We can't read other people's thoughts, but the only thing we can do is be responsible for our own actions. Okay. So just own your feelings and realize that you cannot control what other people are doing. You can only control what you're doing. Number 3, recognize the fear bonds that are present in your relationships. And sometimes we're not aware of the fears that are motivating us in a relationship. So mostly those fears will revolve around fear of rejection, maybe fear of the other person's anger, or fear that the other person will shame them. So if you recognize, if you have a relationship that's not a relationship that's engendering love, rather fear, ask yourself, like, what's happening in this relationship? Am I afraid that this person is going to reject me? Am I afraid that they're going to be angry if I don't agree with them or do what they like? Or am I afraid that somehow they will shame me? And so if you can recognize, again, that whole idea of recognition is very, very important in getting healing. And then number 4 is to let go of controlling the results. Love bonds are based on your ability to return to joy. They are not dependent on others' responses or behaviors. So let go of what other people are doing and realize I can't do anything about what they're saying or doing. So, I'm just going to live and let live. All right. So I just want to mention one other thing. Sorry, I'm flipping pages here. But I want to mention a word about courage. I just got a few quotes here from some, prominent people about courage, just to, help you to think about that. Mark Twain said, "Courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not the absence of fear." Franklin Delano Roosevelt said that courage, again, he's echoing Mark Twain, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear." And Norman Schwartz, I can't pronounce his name, Norman said, "True courage is being afraid and going ahead and doing your job anyhow." That's what courage is. All right. And I want you to think about the fact that the word courage comes from the French word cœur, which means heart. And so take heart. God is with you. And so I pray for you that you will start to recognize your fears and recognize the presence of the Lord that will overcome those fears. Next week, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what it looks like to live with freedom from fear. And that will be our last session on fear. So have a beautiful day.